That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win.
It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit. I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger.
That's one of those things you hear every day, and I've just like never really settled on a good stock answer that I just say to every single person that tells me, oh, you're looking small today. Maybe Marcos, you got anything for me?
Well, pre-workout, I'm always like, haha, yeah, thanks. Post-workout, I'm always like, just grunt. I'm like, whatever.
Well, I feel like that's what the normal joke is for the big guys.
Yeah,
you guys are probably big-ish. Like,
what are you weighing in at now, Ethan?
This morning I was 298, so I've been right at 300 aim.
What? Where's the Jesus Christ?
I was listening to who's that new kid that just won and is going to like the Olympia, or no, he's going to his first pro show. I think it's in Chicago. Not Jensen I can't remember. A kid from Jersey. Anyways, he was like, I know
exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
he's talking about his stage where he's like, you know, I went from 238 the last year, went up to 300, and then came back down to 246, and I'm just like, fuck, my God.
Yeah.
Like, I put on like 8 pounds. It's like, you know, put on 60 pounds to put on 8 pounds in a year, and I'm like, fuck.
Well, I figured we would do a rolling start. So what that means is generally I'll throw some sort of really shitty joke out and then see like kind of the warm everyone up. It's like an icebreaker. I don't know if you get those in New York. That's a Canada thing maybe. But
your hair thing was an icebreaker enough, but sure, go for it.
Yeah. So what I think is we need to introduce everyone because essentially you two are very smart, very big. You also don't like the internet. So we need I know you also
point out that this is my campaign to. We've been talking to fucking lumberjacks and about beaver hunters for the past like 2 months all the time. So I wanted some New Yorkers on it.
That sounds right up Marcos' lane.
Hey, I'm a champion of the lesbian community, boys. I'm right here. What's up?
Well, basically, Jeb has to go between all these Canadian powerlifters and coaches, and then he doesn't get any of the jokes. So it's kind of time for me to just. We'll be around.
Yeah, I figured we'll just talk about like bacon, egg, and cheese and like Timberlands or something. I don't know.
So
that's a little racist, but I'll take it.
Again, I've been talking to Canadians for 3 months.
All right, take it easy, Chief.
It's been really nice.
Timberland jokes.
So we could start with you, Marcos, but let everyone know kind of just introduce yourself. Basically, we got Ethan and we got Marcos. Basically, two underground, but not underground. Would you consider you guys strength coaches, trainers, bodybuilders, people who do mushrooms? Like you just all
I'm just some dude who knows a lot of people, I guess. I don't know. I'm an accountability mitigator is what I do, because I'm not really a trainer, because people just come to me and they're like, I'm still fat. But my name is Marcos Rodriguez, New York thoroughbred. I've been training now for about 20 years. And in those 20 years, I've just met some awesome people, and that's how I end up on all these podcasts all the time. That's it. Nothing special here.
What happened to your podcast? Like, because you have a podcast with Pat Davidson, or like, and it's the brothers, the twins,
twins.
Is that even a thing anymore? Is there no more twins?
Well, we had this thing happen here in the modern world called coronavirus. Yeah. So it's just been hard for us to schedule the time together. I know up in Canada, nothing's changed really. So
no, nothing's changed.
Right.
Gyms are still open. Actually, we shut them down in Toronto again, but I'm not from there, so it doesn't matter. Okay, Ethan, you got a big resume. I want to be thorough, because this is one of your opportunities to like put it all out there, like flash the belt, let everyone know all the things.
Let's see. So I went to school at Springfield College, got a degree in exercise science and nutrition. That's where I met a guy named Pat Davidson that I think we all know. He was my professor there. Went on to co-found a team called Team Iron Sports there. Met a lot of great guys through that. We had a few guys turn pro in strongman, and Pat coached that team. So started competing in bodybuilding around that time. Competed as a teenager. That's just before that, kind of making the transition from training for football to watching the Ronnie Coleman videos and deciding that I kind of loved the lifting and the training more than the actual sport itself. Is kind of how I ended up at Springfield. It was the only school I applied for just because I knew right away that's what I wanted to do with my life. So fast forward, I went from Springfield to do my last internship in New York City. I ended up at a place called Peak Performance. And at Peak, we were, in the process of building sort of a new mecca for strength and conditioning, as you could call it, in New York City. That ended up going south for, various financial reasons. But what came out of that was really a great group of trainers, physical therapists, and really just a community around fitness that was brought on to build this Peak Performance, sort of mecca of fitness. And those guys are all spread out, even around the country now. But I think even though it was negative, I guess, from the standpoint of the gym, it did bring together a lot of great minds, and some of those minds, like Pat, are still in New York. So from there, Pat and I went on to create another business together, which was really a technology-based business centered around measuring output in strength conditioning. So that's what we're doing now, coaching people one-on-one, just like Marcos, at Hype Gym in Union Square. And the rest of the time, or I should say probably 90% of the time, I'm bodybuilding. And then other than that, like I said, working on the tech for our strength-based software.
That's why
I saw a Hype Gym commercial this morning watching the news this morning. No shit.
Really?
On TV. I was
say,
like, yeah. Of course, Kate was on it.
I feel like
you guys.
The only reason Ethan's here is because we remembered, like, oh yeah, Ethan's still like around because you were on like a Hype video. There was someone taking.
No, it was N1. That was Cass posted it.
No, there was that, but there was also the one. There was a video of someone squatting at Hype, and then you were in the background coaching someone, and I sent it to Jeb. I'm like, Jesus Christ, or maybe you said to me, we're like, Ethan gained 70 pounds since last time I seen him. We need to talk to him. What the fuck? So I guess like Marcos, you weren't at Peak, so you're the odd man out there. What's you just friends with all of them?
Yep. Well, they sort of all came to Hype just because, just by word of, I mean, I knew Nick, who was the manager at the time. I had worked with Nick for a short stint, and we stayed friends. He had told me about his idea about Hype, and I was like, oh, I got some like all-stars that could come over here. I spoke to Vinny, Pat, and Ethan, and they immediately decided to come on over. It was just a better space for, at the time, that we could find. I was at a place called Untitled Fitness. It was great, but 2 out of the way. Hype was closer to Union Square, which is just geographically convenient for most of our clientele. So it worked out great for everybody. And the community we built there now is just fucking awesome. It's like just a clubhouse. So
were you ever going to open your own gym?
Myself?
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to do things like that, but I just...
Because I remember really years ago, Sean Heisen was like, hey, my buddy Marcos is thinking about opening a place. If he does, I want to put you guys in contact. I just remember him like saying that, and I was like, and this is years ago. This is like back right before Peak went, like right around when Peak was kind of closing down or whatever that time was.
That may have been Hype then. I'm not sure.
It might have been Hype. You might have just been talking about you going to Hype. Because in addition, Ethan is also the only person in my entire life to ever, it's the only time I've ever had an interview at a place and not gotten a job. It was at Peak. And it was the best thing that ever happened because they went under like a month later. Yeah. But Ethan emailed me my rejection letter.
What was that like?
Oh God.
It was hard. It was actually, I mean, it turned out to be great because it was literally like a month or two later.
Was it? Let's ask him, like, was this a templated email or was this like?
This is what the podcast is really about.
It's really about.
I literally had no idea.
Ever since then, Jeb's gained like 50 pounds. You're welcome, Jeb.
Please tell me you spent some time on it. Like you didn't just like.
It was actually it was really well written and so I hadn't met Ethan, so I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but it just seemed so professional coming from there.
It was just copy and pasted. It was just like,
what was this? I know you probably don't remember, but did you wrote them out personally? Like, was that hard for you?
Did I interview you, Jeff?
No, I don't think so. What's his name came in the middle of the interview, which actually I think sunk me. The owner, what was the guy's name? He's still around.
Joe.
Okay. And like Joe was like, I guess I started talking about because me and Ben Bruno are friends. And Ben was like, you didn't tell him we're friends, are you? And I was like, yeah, well, why? He's like, oh, we just had this big falling out because he tried to take credit for Justin's throw and I called him out on it. I was like, oh, that was probably not great.
Did you put that in the email? You like this whole Ben Bruno thing is just too much for Peak. You know, there's too much. We don't want drama here.
It's just Joe is a unique individual. I mean, he's a tough run, but he was intense.
So basically, the reason why we created the podcast, talk shit about people who lift nowadays, because I don't know. It seems like fitness is getting really fitnessy, and so we try to pull on people that like still remembered like how to lift and like eat. Is this? I guess, what are you seeing with lifting culture? Because we like the talk culture, and then we'll talk other shit. But like, I don't know, Jeb, how you want to word this, but what's changed? Like, why does it feel like it's getting softer, even though fitness is probably the biggest it's ever been in recent memory? What are you guys seeing kind of through your progression in the career? And we can start with Marcos. I feel like you have a good take on this.
I just turned 39 recently, and I've been lifting. The first gym that I worked at was Coliseum Gym in Middle Village, Queens. It's where like Kevin Oak and Larry Wheels came out of. I was their first trainer on grand opening day. Back then it was different. And even before that, I was like working out at the gym. I had dropped out of Stony Brook University and like decided to start working out seriously or whatever, just every Flex magazine, Muscle and Fitness, Muscular Development that I could get my hands on. I just had stacked at home, just devouring those pages. Back then it was a bit different. There was no social media. People didn't work out to be like, hey man, look at me, look at my pecs, look at this. It was just a very self-censored pursuit in the sense that I'm doing this for me and nobody else, and whatever else comes of it, maybe girls, maybe, a fucking old school powerlifter mentor or whatever, cool. But it wasn't for the flaunting. And back then it was interesting because we really didn't have all the research that we have now that's been more prominent, I guess, in like the last decade with guys like RP or Eric Helms and Knuckles and all those guys just like putting shit out, Brad Schoenfeld. It was just, you just go up to the old school bodybuilders and it's like, hey, how do I get big arms? All right, we're going to do fucking arms for 2 hours or whatever crazy shit it may be. So it was just very different back then. Now, with the advent of social media, I feel like it's definitely more of a narcissistic thing for most people. And it's sort of been really great working out with Ethan and just getting to know him more as a person, because he's like this weird, he's like the Neo of that sort of time frame, that time period where he's like, he has the passion of the old school dudes, but he has all the knowledge and then some from all the new stuff now. And he does it for himself as per the whole social media thing, so that's been kind of cool working out with him, getting to know him on that level. But it's been definitely an evolution and de-evolution at the same time with the whole fitness industry. A lot of peacocking and a lot of dick measuring contests online that I see with like different schools of thought. But I guess that's the human nature, right? It's the whole tribalism shit. So it doesn't bother me, or I don't think Ethan either. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Well, Ethan's take would be kind of cool because that's kind of where we've come to the conclusion at is, and not that we make fun of science, but it's almost like the science has and the metrics we'll call it the new school, has almost prevented people from like progress. Like it's like an excuse not to work hard. And so that's where it'd be interesting to hear Ethan, because I know Ethan knows, like you're 10 years planned ahead. So where's your head at?
I think it's typical with any generation to kind of look back, you know, at the time when they were teenagers, or, you know, even when their parents were, you know, either you're sort of influenced by your parents and maybe your parents followed, you know, Arnold, or, you know, in my case, maybe Sly. But to look back like in your high school years and say, oh yeah, those were the golden eras, or the era before that was the golden era. And I think that's just human nature. I think every generation has done that. There's nothing unique about our generation looking back and saying, oh, those were the good old times. I think the only difference really is just like the pace of technology at this point. You know, it's not happening at a linear pace. It's exponential. So things are, you know, moving more and more towards entropy. And it's, I don't think it's a fitness problem or maybe even a problem altogether. It's just literally what's happening in the world. And I don't know that anything we do in fitness per se is going to change, you know, that progression of things. So to tell you the truth, like I don't really pay too much attention to like what other people do or say. So I can't like speak on, you know, what's happening on social media or what other people think, or, you know, what their motivations are. But I would just say, to answer like these sort of questions, I'd probably look outside fitness. I doubt fitness is really the thing driving these behaviors. It's more just technology, you know, innovation driving technology that ultimately drives human behavior. And that's probably where we need to look.
Well, and part of that is even like we can bring up the business and the kind of like, would you say the strength score? I can't remember what it's changed to, but like that was a solution to kind of this problem, right? Because it's using kind of new school technology and data to essentially get people to not bitch out and like drive these things. So kind of, we can maybe tie that into like, where does that fall into, and I guess why was it created? And maybe, you know what I mean? Because I think that that almost is that middle place where we're trying to solve that through the new stuff.
Well, the problem we were really trying to solve is, you know, what are people being rewarded for ultimately? Like to drive behavior, you know, you have cues and rewards on, you know, on both ends. And we really wanted to reward the behaviors that we actually thought would drive performance. So if you look at like a typical group class model, what's really being rewarded is just being more tired. And fatigue isn't ultimately what we're searching for. It might be a proxy of, you know, of hard work, but at the end of the day, measuring fatigue can lead you astray. And what you were really seeing in group fitness was ultimately just more ways to create the sensation of fatigue. I mean, there were, whether it be a class that was, you know, extremely hot, you know, 100 degrees inside the class, or they even had classes that were extremely cold. Like you're just trying to provide people with this sensory experience that, you know, that at the end of the day is going to change the hormones and chemicals they release to give them a feeling. And, you know, we think you can still get that feeling, but actually like objectively measure what matters. And in this case, like the primary thing that we measure is work. You know, just the total amount of like force you're creating over distance. And one of the things that a lot of people were missing, you know, as far as strength training measurements go, was that distance component. So we wanted to reward people for going through a full range of motion. And if they're going through a full range of motion, then they're also being rewarded for putting more weight on the bar. And, you know, the ultimate equation that it ends up with is work. And we also measure power. When you're looking at power or velocity, it gives you a good idea of fatigue as well. So there's going to be a linear correlation between velocity and fatigue. So it gives us a way to both look at, you know, how much fatigue you created during that set. And then at the end of the day, in the context of what you're trying to improve, how much work you did, you know, comparing apples to apples. We're not trying to compare two different workouts, but if you repeat the same workout and you get a higher total work score, in most cases, you know, that's a positive thing.
Can you
Now
measure
this model is predicated kind of on Gen Pop though, right? Because I assume that you guys, your training is pretty different from this model, right?
Well, this is why I was going to ask. Actually, this is actually good, and maybe you guys both feel this, but essentially the big thing was like measuring what matters. And so I'm kind of interested in like, what the hell is that for you? Because we've had like casts and we've had guys talk about bodybuilding and all like the things. Where are the priorities for you guys in terms of, because you're both smart and you've learned all this shit, we'll call it all the new school stuff, and we brought people from different individual schools of that, but where's the combination of that and where's the priorities lie now kind of to get huge in a not Gen Pop way?
As far as like the strength score thing goes, I mean, it's not necessarily built for the Gen Pop. I mean, you're talking about a measure that's kind of like ubiquitous, you know, across not even just like strength training, but just life in general. You know, I mean, work and power are measurements that, you know, we use in health and fitness, like cardiac rehab. So let's like take professional sports, for example. I mean, we're getting measures of, you know, total work on the playing field. You know, we're using GPS to quantify like acute to chronic workload ratios. Essentially what we can do in the gym is the same thing. So this technology gives us the ability to measure the total amount of work someone's accumulating in the gym. And it's a much better way than necessarily only looking at, you know, sets, reps, and load. You get to see set to set, like, did your distance drop off? You know, when you're doing something like rows, for example, like a chest supported row, you know, how do you really quantify what full range of motion is, like in terms of how much, you know, humeral extension you get? That changes set to set, and you may be at the end of the block and say, oh, I put more weight on the bar, and I would say, well, you did less work, you put more weight on there, but you moved it less distance. And it's same thing with the squat. You know, it's pretty difficult to see that with the human eye, but in training clients, and I absolutely use it in my own training, I'm looking at that set to set. You know, I have an expected drop off that I'll see, you know, in some pulling exercises, but I also want to see a pretty predictable pattern with the power or velocity from rep to rep. What you see in less experienced, like less trained, you know, clients or athletes, is that it's not a very linear drop off on velocity, that the bars are kind of spastic. And what I think you're seeing there is really just different recruitment strategies and different sort of like patterns of movement throughout the set to complete the task. Like for me, the task might be to fatigue a given set of muscle fibers, but for a client, the task might be to move the weight from A to B. And when they're just trying to move that weight from A to B, what you end up seeing is maybe their set ends, you know, either at 90% of their best velocity, or you see the reps right before the last ones kind of like, you know, it's hard without showing kind of a picture in front of you, but if you can imagine like a bar graph, we're displaying a bar graph and each bar is a rep, and each one of those reps is displaying like the speed that the bar is moving. If it's a nice linear smooth drop off, that's someone who's really able to recruit you know, all those fibers with each rep and just fatigue them at a steady and consistent rate, rather than sort of like finding another way, another strategy to complete that movement. So I find that a lot, you know, especially with pulling exercises, or when people are doing legs, you see a lot of flat graphs. You see a lot of like no drop off in velocity. And it's just simply because the amount of energy, the amount of motivation that it takes to actually go to failure on a leg exercise and not cheat, you know, not use a different strategy. I mean, I see that even with people that I train with that I've been training for 10 plus years. They're not ending with a smooth, like linear drop off in velocity. Because, you know, maybe instead of using a knee dominant strategy on the squat, they're using more of a hinge to kind of finish, you know, the last couple reps. And there's percentage points in there in terms of, you know, not just your ability to fatigue the muscle, but also potentially in, you know, risk for injury as well.
So this system is basically the brainchild. This is like, they talk about AIs and stuff. It'd basically be like yours and Pat's brain, and like if you guys had a kid, it'd be this machine essentially. Does it tell jokes too? That would be. No, but that's sick. So I guess Marcos, you don't like. How has your training changed knowing all this? Like, has it? Because like, there's still like, let's just say not everyone has this fucking system. So what are the things you're looking for? I guess because like
with the strength score,
yeah,
I've messed around with it, but we don't implement that into our. That's not like, at least for me, it's not a priority in my workout.
So where are you going? Like you didn't just get big by chance. Like, are you still reading Flex?
No, I haven't seen one of those in a long time. No, well, I'm following Ethan's program now. Basically, we just accumulate sets over time. He plans out all the blocks and mesocycles and all that stuff. So I basically just follow his lead. I'm here as basically his student. That's it. He's my accountability mitigator. So
sorry, Jebby, you're gonna say something.
I was just gonna say, like, so what brought you here? Like, like we all have our biases, right? Like, regardless of, I there was a thing. Mike Israel was talking about, or quoted someone. Oh, he was quoting Team Evil GSP, Broderick about saying like, hey, going to failure or beyond. Is really more of a hindrance to recovery. And someone's like, wait, but doesn't Broderick train to failure? And it's like, yeah, because he likes to. So is there any things that you guys like still do that like maybe don't mesh with the latest research or whatever, but it's like, you know what, I just enjoy this and I like to do it. It might not be optimal, but there's something to it. Or even historically that you've done that now you've stopped because the research says otherwise.
I mean,
go ahead.
I still typically have the last set to failure once we get about a third of the way through the mesocycle. It's, to quote unquote form failure with like your squats and RDLs and stuff like that, where, at this point I've been training long enough, like we were talking about with the strength score, my technique is good enough where like there's really not any deviation. I'm not really changing the motor pattern significantly. My legs are shaking underneath me as I'm coming up in the squat, but it's in a very controlled setting. We're using exercises that have constraints that really fix us into like using the muscles that we're trying to use. So it really starts with having those constraints in play. And, then just measuring over time. I mean, I haven't found, going to failure on, arm exercises and medial delts and calves, to really be much of a hindrance, but I do find it helps in measurement. Mm-hmm. There was a quote by, the founder of Nautilus, that was basically just saying like, look, you can only measure zero and failure, Arthur Jones. Yeah. And, that's obviously there's nuance to that. You can argue that point, but he's coming, from an engineering background more than anything else. And, I agree to that. I agree with that. I think you want to create some degree of simplicity where you can measure progress. That comes back to the strength score thing. Like, I think it is important to create a system, even if it's not perfect from the standpoint of like, maybe every detail of what science says is acceptable, but sometimes I think you can favor measurable over, whatever the fuck optimal means. Because at the end of the day, like being able to actually say, I took a step forward is, one of the most important things we can do. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do with the TAC. That's what I'm trying to do with my programming, is in the most objective way possible say, I actually did something. And that's what I really like about bodybuilding is, it's really in your own hands to do. Like when you make a change, no one spoon fed you that food. Sometimes I do, like a baby bird feed Marcos, but that's a whole different thing. But every rep that you did, every piece of food that you ate, you know, every decision that you make on a daily basis, you know, ultimately lends towards your progress. And there's not a ton of things in life that are that direct, where, you know, a lot of things just come down to luck. And obviously there are, you know, genetic components in bodybuilding. You know, there are outside factors that we can't control. But more than anything else in my life, I've just found that's a thing that, you know, is really like under my control. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So going back to the programming thing, to, you know, circle back to your question, things that we do differently. I do, you know, if we have, our mesocycles last anywhere really from like 12 to 20 weeks. You know, you mentioned Broderick Chavez. You know, he would hate that I call him this, but he's definitely one of my mentors, someone I've spent a tremendous amount of time learning from. We've, you know, have calls on, you know, a monthly or bi-monthly basis, you know, somewhere around the beginning and end of mesocycles, or just simply when I've accumulated enough questions. You know, I basically keep a little tab. And
you need a logbook if you're going to get on a phone call with him, because it's going to be like this.
Yeah, I mean, I prep for all these things. I have a tab, you know, in my phone, just called consults. And under consults, I have, you know, 10 or so coaches where whenever I have a question that I think is relevant, like to their specialty, you know, I just take a note under that, and, you know, I'll accumulate 30, 40 questions under, you know, Broderick's note, and then hop on a call with him and, you know, tell him what the progress has been like over this mesocycle. Just try to solve problems. You know, when I first met him, you know, before, you know, he had the paid website and everything, you know, one of the first things I heard him say is, you know, he's a problem solver. He's a biologist and he's a problem solver. So, you know, that's how I treat all these coaches, as problem solvers in their respective fields. So yeah, you know, it's, I absolutely do go to failure. I don't necessarily aim for, like, I use RPE from almost like a retrospective standpoint, where I have, you know, sort of an RPE goal, sort of almost like a rough guideline of where I want to be. Like, I absolutely don't want to be taking all sets to failure, you know, at a high volume, like in the beginning of a mesocycle. I know roughly where I want to be RPE wise, but I don't pretend to know exactly where that is. And I really just let the progress of the phase sort of dictate that by itself, in a sense. So if I go through a mesocycle and I say, well, you know, I progressed this a little bit too fast, whether it be in volume or whether it be proximity to failure, I find it more useful to kind of go back, reflect on that in a retrospective sense, and then make a better plan next time, rather than, you know, week to week trying to say like, oh, I feel too sore, or like, you know, obviously there are things that come up that, you know, you have to, you know, go auto-regulate week to week. But for the most part, I think you're better off not letting your emotional state and your subjective feelings dictate your, you know, day-to-day and week-to-week programming. I'd rather let my actual objective progress dictate that. And, you know, not that I still don't take note of that stuff, but it's, that stuff usually becomes pretty predictable once, you know, you've nailed down sort of an objective framework overall. Like, I can tell you, you know, like this morning, I took my blood pressure and my blood glucose. I looked back on my sleep data for the week, recorded my weight, and, you know, I have about a dozen subjective measures that I just have learned over time. These are the things that break when I'm at the end of a mesocycle, or when I've accumulated a substantial amount of fatigue. At some point, you know, you're going to see orthopedic problems. You know, at some point, you know, digestion, appetite, you know, those things are a little bit easier to measure. But also you may come to the point you say, oh, you know, I'm just more of a dick. And, you know, like, libido is never really a problem, but, you know, that could be for some people. And, you know, those sort of things, you say, oh, you know, I'm just a little bit more anxious. Like, I'm fatigued I'm taking more naps during the day, like things like that. And it just becomes so predictable over time where you're like, oh, I know this person. That's the end of the mesocycle person. And he puts on his headphones and he doesn't talk to anybody, you know, like 30 minutes before training. And like, it's not because there's, you know, something wrong in your life. It's just because you've accumulated enough stress that you've earned this fatigue. This is where you're supposed to be. And just make sure that that lines up well with, you know, the length of your mesocycle. And you say, okay, if I wanted to accumulate this amount of stress by the end, but if you still got 6 weeks to go, then, you know, you fucked up.
Yeah, it's funny because you talk about that, and it's like you always, when you hear those things, you always think about people in a deficit. But this last massing cycle I went through, that's how I felt, and I was like, it still had, like you said, like 6 weeks. I'm like, what's going? Why do I feel like this? My digestion went to shit. I was just tired all the time. I just felt like garbage. And then Dean and I were joking because like both of us were like, all right, like just we both kind of were like cut the food out, and both of us like 3 weeks later were like cut workout volume down and food out, and felt great.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where we're not Ethan.
Right. Yeah, now I just think what it'd be like with another 80 pounds.
I don't want to talk about gaining weight around Ethan because he'll just feel like, shut the fuck up. Ethan, I gained 20 pounds in a year and a half. It was the hardest thing ever. And then I realized bodybuilding wasn't for me. I don't have the I don't even want to call it desire. It's like but that person that you're talking about, like you have to plan it out. Otherwise, like you can't do it. Otherwise, like, I don't think there's a way to just half-ass it. You probably could do it, but I don't know.
So Marcos, how do you feel on that same question?
I want to know what Marcos is. Yeah. Like,
Ethan, you muted yourself, by the way.
Oh,
no, Ethan just muted himself.
I did it on purpose. Yeah,
right.
I'm outside. There's lots of wind, and I'm like playing with my dog.
Ethan doesn't do anything by chance. Like that was what stupid shit.
So it's been cool because I stopped doing all my stupid shit when I started training with Ethan, which has been about 2 years now. Just a lot of junk volume, you know. Work has been a priority for most of my life, so training clients has always been my number one priority, and working out second. Now that's bumped up a little bit, training with Ethan, just because I have to. Otherwise, I'm the fucking fatigue person all the fucking time. Mm-hmm. So historically, I would just do very, you know, typical bodybuilder splits, chest buys, back tries, legs, try to get them each twice a week, hit those muscle groups twice a week. But now training with Ethan, just setting these constraints on myself, just like, all right, well, this is what's happening. And these are the reps that I'm, you know, these are the exercises I'm going up in reps week per week. There's a very savage yet serene simplicity to that, where it's just like, I know what's coming next. I know what's coming next. So the first couple of weeks I may feel great. And then it's like, all right, well, now we got to rev it up. Whether we're training together or not, I still follow his program. So it's just been more efficient and more mature, rather than me like saying like, you know what, I'm going to fuck off today and not work out, which would have been a thing in the past. And in the past, I'd just been like a couple of years ago.
Well, at Coliseum, like I always joke, like everything, all the guys at Coliseum, it was just like everyone's just like, we're just fucking maxing out everything every day. Like that place was balls out.
So when I worked at Coliseum, I lived in Washington Heights still. It would take me an hour and a half to get there and 2 hours to come back home, because I lived on 161st in Amsterdam, and to get to Coliseum, I had to take the A train to the E train to the bus and then walk. But it was great. You know, at 20 years old, who doesn't, you know, fucking train like an idiot? But as you get older, you realize you can't do that forever. And that's why training with Dr. Grossman over here has been a blessing, just because I don't want to be broken down anymore, and I want to grow some more. And I've made some pretty consistent gains. So it's it definitely works.
You've grown a decent amount. Your shape has gotten really, really nice. Like you know, you got good shape. This is like, I know, talking about bodybuilding stuff, it just gets real.
It's interesting hearing you guys talk, because the first time I went to Hype, I was like, these guys are crazy. Like, I even brought this Pat story up. Like, Pat didn't warm up and failed his first set at like 455 on squats, and I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be a fucking PhD. He's like, I'm going out next set. Like, what? And I don't know. It's interesting because Ethan, you're not part of that group, and they're all fucking scattered now because they're all fucked up from being crazy. So environment plays it, but I think environment can also be a detriment. Like you're talking about this Coliseum and everyone's maxing out. Like that's a sweet place to be at, but fucking doesn't last.
And
Everyone
I think
broke down fast.
I think everybody does that at some point
Yeah.
in their lifting career. You lift for fun, right? I'm here trying to fucking lightweight, baby. Fucking trying to be the fucking Maryland Muscle Machine Part 4. But again, as you get older, you know, you need to like really sit down and be like, all right, do I want to do this forever? Because if I do, I need to somewhat plan this. So
is it good? Like, and this is where maybe Ethan's opinion, because he's like very level-headed. Is there a place for that in terms of even knowing your limits? Because I think that's a big thing that's lost with this metric-based system, especially for people that aren't you, is that they don't actually know where the fuck their ceiling is or limit or whatever to then inform the data. Like even using RPE as a base judgment, like they have no fucking clue. And so is maybe a period of like stupid, and we call it stupid, but we can call it old school or fun or whatever you want to call it. Is there merit to being there and knowing like this is hard? This is what hard work is. This is what stupid is. This is what strength is.
Yeah, I definitely think so. But again, it's not unlike any other, you know, discipline or thing in life. Like your early childhood environment ultimately like frames who you are later. And some people are lucky enough to have that environment, and some people aren't.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we're coming from a place where we were just fortunate enough, you know, to sort of be in that environment. And I guess nowadays, you know, again, I'm not speaking from experience on this, but I imagine some people's environment might just come over the internet. It might just be watching videos, you know, of other lifters, and that's the inspiration they get. I mean, I know for me, like watching videos of Ronnie Coleman growing up and Jay Cutler and stuff, that was certainly inspirational. By the time I was a teenager, you know, they had YouTube, and I could watch some of that stuff. But also like the barrier to entry as far as knowledge and experience was a little bit higher, in the sense that like I spent a lot of time traveling to those places. You know, I trained at Gold's Gym Venice, you know, with the pro bodybuilders. Like I spent a lot of time there when I was out at Athletes Performance, now Exos. You know, I trained at Metroflex Long Beach when I was out there. You know, I still have passes to the East Coast Mecca here, Bev Francis. You know, I have the day passes in my wallet, you know, and I take the 2-hour train ride out there. You know, I've done internships around the country, you know, where you spend thousands of dollars to work for free. And I think, you know, if we're going to talk about things that are, you know, potentially lost a little bit, it's just simply like, you know, access to information is so much easier.
Yeah.
And when you had to go and physically seek it out, it's a different experience. You know, when you're physically with those people, and you can, you know, you actually train alongside them, see the weights that they're using, and, you know, go out and have dinner with those guys. I think in some ways, like, it brings you to their level in the sense you realize, like, wow, this person is, you know, is the best in the world. They are, you know, leaps and bounds above me, but it's not impossible, especially when you meet them and they're like, you could do this, you know, if you wanted to, you could do it. And you sort of feel that way when you spend enough time with those people in person, and they see that you're willing, you know, to, you know, to go to by any means to sort of like get to that point when, you know, they show up at the gym and you're just there sitting, you know, outside on the concrete, like waiting for it to open. You know, or, you know, you're offering as a teenager, you know, to pay them large amounts of money, you know, that you earn, you know, it's not like your parents gave it to you or anything. Like you went out and worked, and, you know, you show them that it really means a lot to you to learn. And then a lot of them end up doing it for free. You know, a lot of people are willing to give their time to someone who's that dedicated and that passionate about it. So I guess if we've lost anything, it's like anything else in life. When you make things too easy, you know, you lose sort of some of that greatness. I mean, that's why we have so many fat people right now, because I have a Whole Foods that I can see from my deck, and, you know, walk 3 minutes, across the way here and go grab a pint of ice cream.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that point though. Like weirdly, our Texas experience, like that was pretty much the reason why I got big, or like tried to anyways, because we were doing this fucking contest and like we're training hard. And I'm like, I'm gonna fucking beat Pat, and then like you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna compete, and then you just fucking mopped us on everything, and I was like, okay, maybe this guy like gets it. And I was trying to figure out like what it was, but essentially you committed to these variables in these training. You're just bigger and stronger than us, and you could fucking tear us apart. So anyways,
it was like immediately post-con. The reason I didn't want to do it is I just came up with contest.
Which is even worse.
I hadn't been training at all. Like, it was, so it was like, I'm not going to be, and there weren't lifts that I do. So
that's why it was bad, dude. That's why it was more impactful, because you're like, I shouldn't be doing this. And you just killed us. And I was like, hey, maybe.
The point is kind of like muscle mass, at the end of the day, fucking matters. People want to say like, oh, bodybuilders aren't strong, but like, there's a lot of potential there when you have muscle mass. So even if I haven't flat benched and back squatted in 10 years, like,
well, it made sense.
I also think though that these principles are not just things that because Dean and I talk about this in the podcast, and we both are kind of where we are, and I think all of us probably on here are where we are, is because people have given to us so much because we were willing to put in the work. It wasn't because we just like paid them or we contacted them online. It was like we showed up and said like, what do we need to do? What can I do to learn from you? And it's like, they're like, okay, well, let's see what you're willing to do. And if you show you're willing to do it, people give freely.
Yeah, that's what I tell, some of the interns now. It's like not about showing up and, just asking people questions, while they're trying to eat lunch and kind of like, always being a fly on their shoulder. But if you just show up and you fucking train hard and you're willing to clean the floors and, you're the best person there. Like literally, if you show up as an intern and you're the best coach or you're the hardest training motherfucker there, that's not arguable. Like you're going to get hired. It's not about you trying to like make friends with, whoever your mentor is at that time or whoever is the higher up. It's almost like people are trying to climb the ladder by, making friends. And I'm sure that matters. But at the end of the day, like people will hire someone that they trust, someone that like, they believe is going to get the job done over their friends. Like they will literally go and hang out with their friends on the weekend, but they will hire the person that they respect.
Is that why you sent Jeb the letter?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is actually a true story.
Jeb right now.
Do you still have the letter? I want to see that shit.
I'm sure I can find it.
He's literally just talking about how you can't trust Jeb. Like
it's framed. It's
I don't think I had anything to do with this. I don't remember this at all. This is unfair.
You literally just described Jeb like 10 years ago.
I'm gonna.
I think it was 10 years
talking,
ago.
Guys. I'm gonna charge my phone. Keep talking here.
Okay.
So,
Marcos, let's talk about like the New York scene, because like I think one of the things that and you guys are interesting because you have your feet in like all the kind of things like strength and conditioning and fitness and this bodybuilding world, but like in the fitness industry, no one really like I'll go to things and I'm the only person from New York there. And they're like, I'm like, yeah, because everyone's fucking making money and too busy and their apartment costs too much to have time to go talk about you dickheads about like your marketing funnel. So like just talk about how you've seen, because you've been around the New York training scene now for a while, 10 years, right? So like
20.
talk about what it's like 20 years. You just turned 30, I thought you said.
39.
39.
Are you serious? You told me you just turned 30. You said,
I think he said 39. I didn't, yeah.
I was gonna say, God damn, you're a lot younger
39.
than I thought. Okay, good. I feel much better now. Okay, good. We're closer in age here. Okay.
You look 30. You look 32. You look my age.
You look young. So tell me how you've seen the scene change then in the last 20 years.
It's about the same. It's not really that much more different. I do see a higher volume of people getting into the industry, thinking it's going to be like, I'm just going to make a shit ton of money real quick, real fast. And, I'm going to be training fucking all my favorite celebrities. It doesn't work that way. Sort of back on Ethan's point, like whether I was going to Coliseum or working at New York Sports Club, I was always working at 2-3 gyms, just grinding and just busting my ass, trying to get to know as many people as possible, trying to train as many people as possible. And after doing about a decade of that is when I could finally go off on my own. I do see a lot of kids nowadays coming into the industry thinking they're going to make 6 figures their first year. Maybe you may be that, the Neo of that matrix, but chances are probably not. So you just really got to put in the work on the actual workload. And then the cool thing that I have seen, again, is just more education. So more research coming out. That's been very different. At the same time, the problem with that is that now, if I'm 19, 20 years old trying to get into fitness, and we all get asked this, it's like, what certification do I take? How do I get started? And it's like, just go to the fucking gym and just start working.
Go to Pure.
Yeah, well, the weird thing though too is that like the regular gyms are kind of just disappearing. Like they're like it's
well now fitness, especially.
Yeah, I mean, like what's left? Like Mid City or and
I'm not even sure if they're
19th Street. Is that 19th Street still there?
Complete reopened. Complete bought the Limelight and Clay on 14th Street.
Oh, they bought Limelight too.
So there's 3 of them now.
Oh shit!
So they'll be around for a while.
That's good. But yeah, it's like it's seeing that landscape because like to me and we were talking to Brian Crown last week and he was in New York for a while and we talked about like the bodybuilding scene and like it's a lot of these places are closing and I don't know, like I'm newer to like lifting to most people and I was never into the bodybuilding scene, but that's what informed my youth. I mean, I'm 42 years old. And to see that part, like, everything kind of started going like, oh, everything's going to be like functional strength or, whatever, 18 different studios. It's like, man, that sucks because like, to me, like I love, people make fun of the term Globo gym. I'm like, I love a place with a shitload of machine. I mean, probably one of my best vacations ever is I went to Chicago and went and trained at Quads. It was just like, I literally sat there talking to the owner about the fact that he has 2 pullover machines. Like, that's the shit, and it's getting. I feel like it's getting lost in your end because of the rents, but who knows? But I'm glad to
buy a pullover machine. So there's one on Facebook Marketplace. This guy like Jimmy rigged a hammer strength to be an old school pullover, and he's only charging it $300, and I almost want to buy it just because like no one has one. But my wife won't. She's like standing outside the door, probably. Like, don't get it, but I want to get it because but that's a big thing. Like you don't see those anymore.
Yeah, and like walking to Quads, and like literally, dudes and women are walking in there, and everyone is fucking huge. And it's just like seeing that, and I'm like, that's. And again, as we were saying earlier,
I love that.
You see someone who's big, like I can automatically be like, look, we might not agree on politics or anything like that, but I know I respect you because you've obviously put in work over time to look like that.
I agree with that.
Is that
so what are you guys at now? Like as far as like you talked about how you used to do like a bro split twice a week. Like where are you guys at now as far as like training splits? Anything in particular?
Like priorities, like other than the normal shit. Like where is it? Where's the magic?
So 2 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Upper, lower, upper, arms, lower, and yeah.
And increasing volume over time. Like, would you say you guys kind of more of a lower volume approach or a higher volume, like intra workout?
Ethan?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's the split it's not necessarily 2 on, 1 off, 3 on, 1 off. We've had stuff like that. We've had stuff like that before in the past where it's like independent of the work week. At this point, it's actually it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because it fits in really well with like the structure of our week as trainers and also, with what's going on at the gym. So like on Wednesdays, Pat does his power hour. So the gym is closed. The power hour is basically just like a weekly seminar that he does. So the gym's closed Wednesday afternoon when we normally train there. And also over the years, like Wednesday's just been kind of like the honorary day off for most people training at Hype. So it's just become sort of like, you know, a general theme and something you've just emotionally become used to. And also when it comes to like the recovery days, a lot of it is for me is planning what I'm doing on those days. I mean, I spend at least as much time on those days doing other, you know, modalities and seeing, you know, therapists and stuff that I have to schedule it in. So when it's, you know, a 2 on, 1 off, 3 on, 1 off, whatever your paradigm is that's outside of the normal week, I find that although sort of you know, maybe ideal from a physiological perspective, as far as just having like an even amount of rest days, it doesn't work super well in the context of like planning and sort of structuring your life, which I think is one of the most important things in bodybuilding. It's, you know, one of the things that, you know, has made a big difference for me that I think most people don't spend enough time on is literally just problem solving and scheduling and sitting down and just figuring out, okay, this is the roadblock right now. What are we going to put into the schedule? What are we going to test out? Who am I going to talk to try to solve this problem? And that all requires scheduling. I mean, I have consults with coaches every Wednesday and often on Sundays. So those are off days. I have, you know, I see like a physical therapist or manual therapist on Wednesdays. You know, I'm typically going to like a pool or doing some kind of like low intensity cardio that also has a component of like compression therapy built into it on those days. You know, even built in a little bit of like using an inversion table recently. Now that I've crossed that 300-pound mark, gravity's kind of a bitch. So, you know, just trying to mitigate that as much as possible. So there's a lot of, my point is there's a lot of things that have to be planned into the schedule. And if you want to plan into the schedule, though, well, you have to work with the rest of the world's schedule. And the rest of the world works on a weekly schedule.
Yeah.
And, you know, most of us trainers don't train on Sundays. Sunday's a day where we get to spend with our families. And part of my recovery process, sorry for the chopper going overhead. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
Do the chopper.
Ah, yes.
It's
I
actually
told
for me,
Marcos we need to get an Arnold impression in.
They planned
God
this.
damn.
This chopper.
They
Yeah,
send
so
the chopper.
we got 3 minutes before this chopper lands on my roof deck and takes me away here.
Yes.
So,
That'd be so awesome.
yeah. So Sundays like day with the family. You know, going for a hike, like you know, catching up on stuff, whether it be, you know, planning related or, you know, we just moved apartments, so stuff that like, you know, real life stuff that's got to take place. So I think it's important to realize that like you exist, you know, under the paradigm of, you know, the same weekly schedule that the rest of the world does. So it's built in that manner. And then as far as choosing what's on each particular day, it's really just starting with, okay, here are like, you know, all the sort of muscle groups that we're training. And then looking back again, retrospectively on like measurements of progress, whether that be strength, like circumference measurements paired with like body fat measurements. And, you know, ultimately like seeing what sort of volumes those muscle groups can handle and, you know, prioritizing them as far as like, you know, what's going to come first in the training session. So although like, you know, Marcos mentioned, let's say, for example, Tuesday is legs, right? Well, the first exercise we do is medial delts. Same thing on Saturday, you know, so we have like medial delts in there 3 times a week, and those are supersetted with calves, you know, which might seem kind of odd, but for me, those are a priority. Whereas even though, you know, quads, you know, are, you know, we might be doing a, you know, a compound exercise like squats, and, you know, many people would put that first, you know, it's not as high of a priority for me, and it potentially comes with more risk of injury and more systemic fatigue.
Well, yeah.
So that's usually last in the training session. So it really just comes down to like laying out all the body parts on a piece of paper, looking back at all the previous data, and saying like, okay, based on that, here's what I'm going to shoot sort of like the mean number of sets for a training block. So for example, if we took quads and we said, all right, we're going to say that the mean number of training sets we want is mean number of sets over the course of the week that we want is 12. And we're going to do, let's say, a 12-week training block. All right, so maybe I'll do something like 6 escalations in sets over the course of that block. That way, real simply, I can just do it every other week. So every other week, I'll add a set. That'll be an increase of 6 sets over 12 weeks. If it's 6 sets over 12 weeks and we want the average to be 12, that means 3 on either side. That means we're going to escalate from 9 to 15 sets over the course of that block, with 12 being that middle range. So everything, every body part based on the previous data has that mean number of sets based on, you know, what I think is going to, you know, lead to growth, or in some cases, you know, just maintenance. But for the most part, you know, at the point that we're all at, you know, we're still trying to get everything to grow to a degree. And, you know, of course, it's, you know, it's a moving number, you know. We're not static in terms of who we are as an organism. We're not static as far as the stresses that are placed upon us. But you do find in general, you know, there's about a total number of sets that you can handle for all body parts over the course of a phase. And I try to fit it into that, you know. So we're somewhere between like 100 and 120 set average for like an entire mesocycle itself as far as total sets, you know, midway through the block. And we might end a block anywhere from like 140 to 160 sets, you know, if it's survivable. I mean, I'm finding myself right now, like I said, I don't typically make changes, you know, week to week as far as just, you know, how I'm feeling. But my quads have been feeling, you know, even with less and less sets, are just feeling like I have the flu and it only exists in my lower body. And they're just, yeah. So every time I, you know, pick my leg up, it's cramping, and they just feel not just sore, but like achy all the time. I'm finding like my contractions are just getting, you know, more and more efficient. I'm recruiting, you know, those fibers better and better. So it's taking less and less sets. And it probably body weight also plays into that as well. You know, I'm walking on those legs all day long. So, you know,
well, in comparison to other 300-pound bodybuilders out there, the New York bodybuilder is a unique experience in that you're actually walking. You're not getting into a car and driving everywhere.
Yeah, it's like, you know, 15,000 steps a day for a trainer is, you know, pretty standard. But I think that's a blessing because, you know, one of the things that most bodybuilders are missing at that size is just aerobic fitness. So I really look at our job as a blessing from that perspective, because it forces me to do something I otherwise might not do.
Does Marcos ever get deadlifts? Because on his website, his favorite exercise was a deadlift. I know at Hype, like, people don't deadlift. So, like, how does that, like, Marcos, how do you get around that?
I actually haven't deadlifted in fucking years.
No one deadlifts.
It's probably, actually, no, it's been about 2 years, because when
your favorite exercise
before I went to Costa Rica, it's all right, I could do it in my mind. It's all right. Just kidding. Before we went to Costa Rica, I was training with Pat, and we were doing like all the cage in and all that stuff. Cage in and like 30-30s and all the fucking brutal shit that Pat comes up with. So back then we were doing a shit ton, or I was doing a shit ton of deadlifts, but currently now, no.
Is the reason
we do RDLs.
I think that's just been my personal preference. That's just seeped into, you know.
I thought it's because like, Pat can't deadlift, so like no one at Hype's allowed to deadlift. Like,
I think Pat can deadlift.
Yeah.
I think slowly over time, I just sort of seeped that into, you know, the general vibe at Pete or at Hype.
It's you.
Because I didn't deadlift. Yeah. I just thought the risk reward from a bodybuilding standpoint wasn't worth it. It's something that I personally got injured on a bunch of times. So I feel like that's just like slowly, you know, like eked its way, you know, into the culture there.
I mean, it's a conversation we've had with multiple people about the same thing. It's like, yeah, from a hypertrophy standpoint, is it worth the risk? Like you said, the risk, especially if you're strong. Like, you know, for, you know, guys starting out, like, yeah, go ahead, deadlift, you're fine. But like, you know, I mean, I don't even want to know when you're pushing 300 pounds, like what's it even worth to, like, deadlifting 400 pounds isn't worth it. So like, what point do you're like, okay, like this is really just systemically crushing me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's been examples of people who've been able to survive it over time, and, you know, maybe they're the outliers, but I mean, the way I've gotten from, you know, training at those old school bodybuilding gyms, you know, with those old school coaches to now is because of things that have broken. It's just problem solving, you know. It's not like this thing was cooler. Like the other way is definitely cooler. I would have just kept doing it. It's just that you run into an impasse.
And it's simply like, sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, is this where this so like, we don't even need to talk PRI, but like, is this where this respiration, range of motion thing, I guess, inform exercise selection? Because you've taken pretty much everything you can take in. Where's your head at in terms of how do you kind of keep that in the mix? And we'll call it variability, call it whatever the fuck you want, but is that informing anything you do as a bodybuilder? Because that stuff doesn't get talked about unless it's that peak crew and their spider web of fucking people. No one else is talking about it. So how do you kind of go about that, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely plays into it. I mean, I think it's just another piece of the puzzle in understanding stress and the impact, you know, of that on your physiology. So you understand like more and more of what does your system do under fatigue, and, you know, how far can you push it in that direction, and then it just gives you some tools to potentially pull back from that. I mean, you're understanding that like in order to adapt, we need these stressors. And because of these stressors, we're creating these habitual patterns that aren't necessarily inherently bad. They're useful for the task we're trying to do, but only being able to do one task and being specialized is ultimately moving you closer and closer to, you know, stiffness and death and rigidity, you know, all these things that are the antithesis of health. But performance isn't health. So I think just having the context to understand what those things look like is telling you where your system is at as far as the fatigue that's being placed upon it. And being able to identify, I guess, what's useful and pulling you away from that, what's authentically pulling you away from that, and, you know, what's just sort of, you know, flashy techniques, I think is important. You know, and sometimes the techniques that might get someone who's not imposing as much stress on their body, you know, out of those patterns are going to be difficult than what might get Marcos and I, you know, out of something like that. I know that's kind of broad, but if you have any more like specifics, I can.
No, you know, but I love this because it's, so Dean and I, when we first kind of met, we started talking, and he was getting into this PRI stuff, and I had gotten injured doing strongman, and so I was like, okay, and I knew Pat was doing all this stuff. I just always, this is when, you know, I've known Pat for years, and I was like, he's the weird guy in strongman with the balloons, like that was like Pat, you know. So I got injured doing strongman, so I started doing bodybuilding stuff, and I was like, oh, this is great, because there's these things that are stabilizing my pelvis and my rib cage and allowing me to do movements pain-free now. And then at the same time, it was like, Dean's like, oh yeah, so we're approaching it from this idea of like being able to do that yourself, stabilizing through this respiration model, also putting yourself into an advantageous position. So it's like, to me, it was like, oh, okay, you know, we've had conversations, and like, you know, I don't think Cass is big on the PRI thing. And I'm like, but you guys are coming at the same thing, but just different.
The more people we talk to, the more like a lot of it doesn't matter. It almost becomes that general conversation of just knowing, I guess, that spectrum, and then making exercise selection based on that. But then you get the range of motion people, like even with Mike talking about it, they're all almost talking about the same shit. They just don't agree with the terminology. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't it seem like that? I don't know. If
There's definitely some fundamentals, you know, to the model that, you know, are you know, hard to disagree with, because they are so general and they are such established parts just of our physiology as a whole. But in terms of how you solve those problems, you know, people have different techniques as far as solving them. It's just understanding, I guess, like the arguments are probably around application more than anything else. And you know, certainly like when I'm training you know, as far as our bodybuilding training goes, like the stuff that Cass is teaching with N1 is much more applicable to what we do when we're lifting weights. There's no doubt about that. I would 1,000 times over, you know, rather have a bodybuilder go through that education. You know, every hour of that education is going to be more useful than an hour, you know, of say the PRI education for a bodybuilder. But yet, you know, for that last 10% of understanding, you know, the recovery process and understanding, I think just like I say, physiology and stress as a whole, there's definitely utility in it. But you don't want, you know, to your point in the beginning, you guys mentioned how people, you know, sort of get overwhelmed with information at this point and end up missing the big rocks. I would say, you know, from a bodybuilding perspective, you know, I've learned a ton from Cass. You know, I work with those guys, like utilizing them from a mentorship perspective as coaches. I've been to their seminars. You know, we've spent a significant amount of time together. So from a bodybuilding perspective, you know, that's invaluable. That's where, you know, I would focus my time. But that's not, you know, Pat's not a bodybuilder, and you can still learn a tremendous amount from him about, you know, general adaptation and, you know, how to plan training as a whole. There are big picture concepts that you can trickle down. And I think the important thing to realize is when you understand the big picture concepts, now you can create your own paradigms. The problem is if all you ever do is, you know, find, you know, guys like Cass and copy what they do, you don't have any ability to necessarily problem solve or create something yourself. There's nothing unique. But when you go out and you learn from other disciplines and you think more big picture, you understand biology, you know, more as a whole, now you can start solving problems looking through it, you know, through a bigger lens. And that's what a lot of people are going to lack, is just that context. Every problem to them looks like a new problem, when really it's all under the same umbrella. So I think the more you study these things directly outside of your field, the more it all starts looking like the same problem. And then what tool you use to solve it, you know, there can be many, but ultimately, you know, you're not kind of just like, you know, shooting in the dark, because you understand the big picture concept of where it's coming from.
Man, that's so. I really think like I mean I don't want to keep you guys too long because I know it's a Sunday and everything stuff to do, but I do want to think like there's a couple things I want to wrap up. Like I've been listening to you know, I've been listening to a lot of bodybuilding podcasts lately just because I really like hearing bodybuilders talk. Like I want to hear about their training, I want to hear about their food and all this stuff. And I really want to see you get on stage soon and start to get into that world and talk about, because there's a lot of guys that actually are talking, like I know there's this like feeling in the fitness world that bodybuilders are all dumb or something, but there a lot of them are talking about these same things. But I would love to see you get in there and kind of talk about some of this stuff with some of these guys and just spread more of this. So kind of in closing, we'll start with you first, Ethan. The big question is when are you going to get on stage?
So I'm going to compete next September in North Americans. So the goal, you know, lifelong has been to turn pro. You know, if anything happens after that, great. But that's, you know, where my mind's been. You know, I competed in 2018 at literally 198 pounds as a light heavyweight, you know, and then as a teenager at probably 175. You know, so I'm 300 pounds in like the low teens, you know, body fat right now. I'm going to get a DEXA here in another 4 weeks and try to confirm, you know, exactly where that is, just for my own, you know, pleasure. Because really the goal that I set out when I dieted down to 200, I was coming down from like 240-ish. You know, now I'm a little bit leaner than I was, you know, at 240 and you know, sitting right around 300. So from here, we have roughly 6 weeks left, like in this mesocycle. I'm hoping to be able to survive that till Thanksgiving. And then from there, really the plan is just rest for about 11 weeks. So somewhere in that, like, 3 to 4 month period of just allowing like systemic recovery, on a physical, mental, emotional level, because the goal back in 2018, was competing in August. So by the time sort of systems come back on board, you've roughly found, homeostasis again, and things are operating on a normal level. That's, anywhere from like 3 to 6 months, so come January 2019 is roughly where, I was back to where I was, like, pre-dieting. So the goal in 2019 was to get up to 300 pounds under 15% body fat by 2021. So I hit that in September of 2020. So that was a little bit earlier, than I expected, which of course was great. But, you're talking about someone who in 2017 was, 215, 220 pounds, so 80 plus pounds of body weight, you're just, you're really placing a lot of stress, on your body, and a lot of stress, like I said, mentally and emotionally as well. So I think what I'm going to need in order to get back, to get in a state where I'm ready to go into a pre-contest period, be 100% focused and be healthy, is a good break. I don't know exactly, I can't imagine myself, fully taking off training or anything, but we know, based on science and experience, like whatever you quote lose during that time, it's going to come back pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not afraid, after this period. Right now I'm kind of what I call like marinating around 300. I got there in September. We're kind of like, mid-October-ish now. So I'm just trying to hold that 300 pounds, in the healthiest, most sustainable way possible now. And once you've held it for a little while, you kind of own that weight. It's like, it's not just a, fly by night kind of thing where the next week you lose it. So even if I'm, bringing food down and, training and supplementation, all that stuff down, come like December, January, February, I'll still be able to hold on, to a good amount of that muscle, but at the same time, just allowing the joints, digestive system, everything to just recover. And then that'll give you about 24 weeks, to sort of like recomp, get my sides back up. I probably won't get fully back up to 300, but I'm sure I'll kind of recomp around that 280, 290 period, and then probably compete somewhere, in the 260s would be my guess.
Yeah, that's great. And Marcos, we're gonna have you on for a full part of this, but we alluded to it earlier. Is your online persona is so tied in with psychedelics. So just in the briefest way possible, talk about what that means to you, and why you kind of throw that stuff out there.
Brief, huh?
We'll do a full exploration at some point.
It's teaser.
I got into that stuff about 5 years ago. No, bullshit. Shit, it's been 7 years, 32. So 7 years ago, as corny and as cliche as it sounds, listening to Joe Rogan talking about ayahuasca with Graham Hancock and all those other people, I just delved into it. A client of mine had gifted me the Cosmic Serpent for my 29th birthday. I had no idea what any of that shit meant. I didn't know what ayahuasca was before that. I read the book, heard it on Joe Rogan, and then just traveled down to Peru, went to Huaraz, Peru, which is way up in the mountains, and did a few ceremonies there. And ever since then, I never looked back. I love it. At the beginning, it was a lot about like healing childhood trauma and whatnot. Not to sound like a little bitch, but that helped a lot. I never had. Before that, I had never gone to therapy or worked through my shit. That helped clear a lot of that gunk out. And Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm 100% on board. I was thinking about this as my big time was in the late '90s, mostly LSD, and I was watching. I was thinking about you because I was watching this Grateful Dead thing came back on, and it was a series I was watching, and like every song came on, and I was like looking at my wife, and I was like, oh man, I just remembered this this time, and we're going through these things,
Flashback.
Yeah, but it's like I really think my worldview as it is very much shaped by that, and I it's like it sounds funny because I always like when you bring this stuff up because it's so not on brand, for what people think about in this world. But it's like I said, I want to get in do like a full thing, but I like touching
full
on
circle. That. Ethan was saying, maybe you could answer this. Like the way we think about training and like how hard we go is kind of centered around how we were brought up. Could you use psychedelics to undo the shittiness of the current generation and maybe put bodybuilding things on during an ayahuasca trip and be like, hey, this is your childhood has changed now. You're this.
No, that's not how that works. But on that point, it was interesting because when I first started working out, I was a very emotional lifter. Just if I'm angry, happy, sad, or whatever, I would just channel that in my workouts. After doing a lot of the psychedelic work, like proper ceremonies, because I've done it like once recreationally, it was kind of weird because it was like that whole, like that anger is gone. So it's like, like instead of listening to Disturbed or Linkin Park, I just listen to like classical music now. And I'm just like, all right, cool. So the motivation definitely sort of changed there, or the energy source of emotion and as fuel. So
that's crazy.
I don't know how that'll work. I do hear of some bodybuilders using microdosing LSD for pre-workout. I don't think I would have a good time doing that. That's just not my thing. Yeah,
no, I see. For me, it was very much a again, not sound corny, but it was a very spiritual thing of like trying to really push the bounds of my own psyche and I always talk about like when you have I've had it without drugs. I was in rehab for 4 months and kind of achieved this like what I would call a state of nirvana, but like this moment when you kind of understand the universe and it's so fleeting and then it's gone and there's no really way to explain that, but I think that oneness, I mean, Ethan is Ethan
calls that the pump.
Yeah,
like he's just so he's so even keel. But like for me, I was a nutcase, so it's like those things kind of helped me be like, all right, so this shit's all right. But yeah, so again, I know it's Sunday. We don't want to keep you guys, but man, I could do this for like 3 hours. Like this is fucking awesome. Really, really appreciate this a lot, guys.
Cool, man. Thanks for having us.
I would ask us where we find you guys. Let's just Ethan, don't worry about Ethan. Marco,
at Hype Gym. That's it.
This is the best.
Marcos is on Instagram.
He's Mr.
I barely use that shit. I just put like IG stories up there, just like funny pictures.
Oh, do it the old school way. Just have them show up at the doorstep at Hype.
That's it.
They're willing to go through that journey. And only that.
Anyone should come go through Hype. Like honestly, like that, the environment in there, it's a good vibe. There's not many places that have that.
Yeah,
and there's still a lot of ball busting that happens, which I enjoy.
You bet. It's good for the ego.
Yeah. So basically, if you want training, go to Hype and ask for Ethan. If you want drugs, go to Marcos. Be like, I want.
Oh, easy, chief. It's partially racist right there.
Again, Canadian racism.
That's sort of like
fucking hosers. We're
the percentages.
That's Zamboni. Fuck out of here.
See, that's a New York joke, right? Like you bust their balls, right? That's how it goes. Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop recording. Good job, guys.
That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit.
I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger.
Stronger.